Rio, what are you going to be doing with your remaining 9 days of this patch?
Is it only 9 days, really?
It is 9 days. Nine
Wow, that's
days.
so short.
Yep.
Um, my hope, hot take, I hope we don't raid this week because it's faded self per week. And then I hope next week is the pre-patch and we can go in with our new talents and just hilariously just like slam our faces with bugged talents into the bosses, and it'll be easy and not like the annoying difficult faded. It'll be Castle Nathria that week, and we can get some people their mounts and then look forward to Dragon. That's my hope.
Hmm. I don't know yet whether or not
So
I'm crushing your
I
hopes or
want
not.
I want the next 9 days to play Wrath Classic.
Gotcha. For me, yeah, I think there's a lot of Overwatch in my future, honestly.
Ooh.
Um, I've been finding that while I have prepared some classes and whatnot for the pre-patch event and all that comes with that there is a lot of time to just step away from the game and try other ones. So why not play Overwatch? It absolutely destroyed. Go 0-3 in our little break group competition where I was the only person to lose all three matches, but that's okay. It doesn't hurt. We don't talk about it though. Um, but we also have some news that's coming up within those 9 days where the season's going to be ending for Mythic Plus, for PvP, and all that. Meaning, if you're looking to get your title for both PvP or M Plus, you're gonna need to have that done by that date. My understanding outside of that, though, is that the mount. I think that there was a post on Wowhead that the mounts and all that will stick around, but I'm assuming that um, some portion of that won't be obtainable anymore.
Yeah, in the past that stuff hasn't been attainable, but then based on their wording it would be. So it's kind of up in the air right now as like which one is correct. And they maybe just said the wrong thing in the text of the post. Who knows? But we'll find out. But yeah, if you want to be safe, do that stuff now in the next few days. I think this week is a pretty decent like push week people were saying for doing keys or something. So uh if you need last minute keys, this is probably the week to do it. I don't know what next week's affixes are because I never look at that stuff.
Hmm.
So yep.
Yeah, last minute high ran keys if you need those.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and next week, yeah, I guess for a lot of people it won't matter if you've got to play, you've got to play during that 4 week. But they have also started testing the pre-patch event, which I will be honest, I have not been able to try. I've hopped on since they started the testing and was unable to really see how to get into the flow of things. Wasn't like prompted with a quest or anything like that. Check that out later. But the little bit that I did see from watching a stream was very interesting. It was like the ice event or something like that. Supposedly there's gonna be 4 events across Azeroth that are going on, one at a time. It would seem kind of like invasions. You could view them as, and you go there. The bar at the top of your screen to defeat some elemental forces or something like that, and then the boss is attackable. After you've killed that boss, you get some loot potentially. There's the potential to get, let's see,
There
um,
was like some transmog sets, and I think it was
transmog.
item level 252 loot for the most part.
Yeah, 252 if that's important to you. I think that's gonna be for a lot of people. Alts just to catch up, just given how
Mm-hmm.
easy it is. It's below LFR level, right? So
Mm,
maybe for your evoker, that's what you want to work on, right?
true. I
Um,
I don't yet know what the evoker starting like questing gear item level is. I would imagine it might be higher than 252 though. Might be like low 300
That's true.
stuff.
I never thought about what they would start out with because they are supposed to start at level 58, and you have like a little intro line
Mm-hmm.
before you get brought to the current world. But the
Dragon Lore.
other benefits include like a toy, some armor sets, like you said, 252 gear, and then there's also an heirloom trinket if you happen to loot
Oh
this
yeah.
somewhat rare piece off of every single boss. There's 4 different ones, so that's kind
I
of cool.
imagine this won't be ultra rare. It's probably like if you do it semi consistently over like a few days over the course of the pre-patch time, like you'll be able to make at least one of these. If not, I think was there one for each or multiple different ones, or was it just the 4 different crafting materials that you needed to acquire. I don't
What?
remember, but
So there's one for each, but they're all unique. So like, there's an earth, fire, storm, a water one. And
right, okay.
forgive me when I said rare. I just meant the text that it comes in is blue, which refers to the WoW as
Okay.
rare, not
Yes.
actually how difficult it would be to obtain. But
Right.
yes, that's all well and good. I personally love pre-patch events. I love content. I am always
They're
seeking it.
also
So
usually they usually give like a bunch of experience. I know they're also redoing the experience of like leveling in general going into Dragonflight, but also usually just doing these things will like level your character really fast if you just participate in them, even if your character's like level 10 or whatever. Normally they scale down and whatnot. Obviously the item level won't be 252 in that case, but you can probably still get like the heirloom and the armor set transmog and stuff like that. So, uh, yeah, expect that to be possibly a good way to level alts as well.
yeah, I haven't ever dealt with that because I've always done the leveling ahead of time. But speaking of that, the Winds of Wisdom buff or something like that, that's the experience buff that you get.
Yep.
That is supposed to be going away. And I think it was mentioned around the time that Evoker was going to be a thing. So I don't know if that's coming out right at pre-patch or what, or
Yeah,
middle of pre-patch. We'll
I
figure
also
that out.
don't know if Evoker is available immediately. I think that might be a week or two delayed thing.
I wouldn't mind it as long as they make sure it's bug free in that event, right? But
Mm.
we'll see. Um, the other thing that we could talk about is the tuning status. They've kind of started to do this, and it's a little weird. It's very hard to see into the minds of the devs in terms of what they're prioritizing. Um, it was a little disheartening as a resto shaman to see an adjustment to one talent that they felt like would make it very useful that very clearly wouldn't, the Earth Living weapon, which is like an imbue that you put on your weapon that's supposed to do additional healing. It's just a garbage talent. You won't really take it. It would need to be tuned very, very high for you to consider it. And so it's frustrating for some people to see those, but you also can't understand fully if, they're literally just trying to tune one talent before they actually take a look at everything else.
Yeah, so the main thing with this, I would say, feedback wise, is we need communication on what their tuning goals are. So,
Yes.
like, how much DPS are we expected to be doing? What percentage, roughly, breakdown of spell A versus spell B versus spell C should there be in the spec? Like, should certain talents only be like viable for PvP? Is that like for the Earth Living Weapon stuff? Is that intended to be a PvP change or a PvE focus change? Because they used to be able to just do those changes affecting the PvP version of the spell only. Are they gonna make those combined now a lot more often? Like, we just need some communication on like what the goals even are and what, and then we can say. I think this applies to also stuff like the Mythic Plus changing to like the keys scaling up to plus 20 and things like that is, are plus 20 keys supposed to be the same as plus 20 keys right now or plus 20 keys in some past season, or are they supposed to be the equivalent of plus 15s right now or somewhere in between? Like, just give us some sort of direction so that we could say this is either too high, too low, or it's in the right range, but then this other thing is too high or too low in relation to the first thing. And like, if you're trying to do all this tuning, I feel like I can't really give any feedback because maybe this thing is too high, or maybe it's the bar that everything else needs to be moved up to, or maybe it's the opposite, where the thing that's at the bottom is the level that everything else is supposed to be brought down to. And I don't know what directions I can give them tuning wise, aside from just saying, like, here's some math. I don't know. I don't feel like that's very helpful, but
Well,
yeah.
they've also kind of never really asked for tuning point of view, right? Like what they've essentially asked for feedback in terms of like how the talents are playing out and stuff like that, but it might be up to them to actually determine if the specs are balanced based on the data they obtain, right? So,
Yeah, the one thing I would say with that is going purely off of their tuning has frequently given us situations where, for example, Survival Hunter and Destro Warlock just do like 3 times the AoE DPS of every other spec in the game. And so if you have the community feedback to say, hey, on your end, this tuning looks correct, but like from the player point of view, this seems clearly out of line and needs some adjustment. and like maybe something in your internal numbers is wrong or off somewhere or has a mistake somewhere. Like, I don't know. I feel like that can only be helpful, and it just results in a better balance in the end. So,
Yeah, we'll have to see direction they take it. I agree. More communication is better. Could never turn that down. The times that they have spoken up, it's felt very, for the most part, it's felt clear that we have a better understanding of where it is that they're trying to take it. Whether we agree with it or not, at least we know, right?
mhm.
That's all we could really ask for at this time. There's not too much time left, and I think that's sentiment that's felt by a large percentage of the gamers right now that are, at least in the higher end of the community, where they're in that bleeding edge content, and I think that's been the case for a lot of past expansions, right? Or that there's just always that feeling of, well, is it really ready, or will it ever really be ready? Because truth be told, whether or not you agree that the patch was ready, we did see Survival Hunter the way it was. If that's what Blizzard viewed as the appropriate tuning for Survival Hunter, then I guess that means that it was ready, right?
Yeah. Um, I I kind of agree with you in the sentiment that it'll never be ready, but I feel like it can be a lot closer to ready
That's
than
true.
it,
That is
it
true.
has been sometimes in the past. Um, and so some of these things just having a little bit of extra time. I don't know. I feel like we all just kind of have to patiently wait, and we're all kind of holding our breath a little bit, crossing our fingers, hoping that things will work out good. But it's hard to really get the whole complete picture when not all the tuning is done yet, and things aren't really in a state where you can say like this is close to the final way it's going to be. It's very up in the air until the very last minute, and then you kind of have to kind of scramble all at once to be like, okay, we expect most of this is going to stay the same. Now what does it look like? And then, oh no, it's messed up in this one way. Like, can they fix it in the last 3 days, kind of thing? Um, I don't think that's the best way to do it, but I don't really know of an alternative way to do it. Um, yeah, I'm sure they have their own internal system in place of a systematic way to do it. So hopefully it works out.
Yeah,
They
and
seem confident at least. I'll give them that. They seem like they've been pretty uh, ahead of the curve, I would say. Not to steal the whatever achievement name or
wow,
whatever, but
but not cutting edge.
I didn't mean to. Yeah, but that they've been compared to expansions in the past, that their development cycle has been um like they're not like chasing trying to keep up anymore. They're kind of like releasing things at a cadence that they're pretty happy with.
Yeah, that's true. And they've also made some very obvious good changes, like the Great Vault. That was something that, it beforehand had to get 2, 5, and 8 raid bosses killed, which is a little the last tier being a little bit less than the max number of bosses in the raid at the moment, being 11 for Sepulchre at least and 10 for others. But them adjusting it down to 2, 4, and 6 seemed entirely reasonable, at least in my mind. And they also knocked off some of the PvP requirements as well. That was taken down a bit too.
Yeah, I commented this feedback in a couple places on Twitter and on Reddit and whatnot. I think Mythic Plus now seems to be the one that's the most uh feels out of line compared to the other two. It's not like super egregious or anything, but I think like Mythic Plus going down to also like 146 or something like that uh would be better. 8 keys in a week just always feels a little bit high to me personally. Um, I related it to like 9 hours a week of like a raid group or whatever. I feel like that's a pretty standard amount of raiding, and doing 8 keys is roughly probably close to 9 hours of time if you're a DPS and you're pugging your keys and things like that. Obviously, it goes much faster if you're in a pre-made group or if you're a tank or a healer and you can find key groups a bit easier in the dungeon finder and things like that. But yeah, I think that amount of time where you're it's almost the equivalent of raiding in 2 guilds during a week or something, I feel like is a little bit steep. Um, so I think Mythic Plus could be lowered down a little bit, and that would be nice, and I would appreciate that a lot. But if it's 8, maybe I just do only 2 slots the whole expansion or something. I don't know, but because I also think the Great Vault, like filling out your slots or whatever, especially with raid being down to 6, where you can be sat on a boss or two or extend a lockout or whatnot and not have to worry about potentially missing so much of them. And the crafted gear stuff, I think, will make needing to fill out all your slots like less of a super high necessity in terms of gearing your character. And so you can probably skip like one or two here and there and not really feel the effect as much. Especially also with master loot, where you won't have items dropping in raid going on people that they can't really use it. You'll like always consistently be getting upgrades onto people in raid.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny to think, how far they have cut down the requirements of the Great Vault over the course of the expansion. We started it out with 3, 7, and 10 for the
Mm-hmm.
boss requirements to build. Now, then it was brought down to 3, 6, and 9, and then 2, 5, and 8. And obviously, with the smaller raid going into this next patch, it's going to be 2, 4, 6 for an 8 boss raid. And that, I agree. I think it matches perfectly. PvP, I agree. Just cut down the honor a little bit. I remember back when I was trying to PvP a little bit, the gap between the second and the third PvP of the vault just felt like it was so big.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea of them making it just a little bit easier. All that really does is it means for the people that don't have as much time that they're still able to potentially fill that out if that's important to them. As for the Mythic Plus one, I think it's a very difficult thing to balance, and I would be shocked, like you started to allude to, if it weren't brought down to something a bit more in line with what people are expecting. I would kind of expect if the max vault reward is really going to come from a 20 the way it's set out to be. I would kind of expect them to bring it down to 136 at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I also have to say, like, that is the grindable content that doesn't require a set group to really ensure that you get that, like a mythic group. I mean, you can plug heroic, technically you can plug mythic too, but for the raid, I mean, but
Right.
mythic plus is just one of those bits of content that's practically grindable if that's what you want to do. And it's also always provided in general the better rewards, I would say. The fact that you can grind it, but also for people that aren't able to clear a lot of mythic bosses, they in the past were very easily able to do 815s for their weekly vault. I think for a lot of people, their Mythic Plus vault filled out more slots for them than their Mythic Raid vault did, at least at the start.
Yeah, that's probably true. I also think they're rebalancing the Mythic Plus like key in relation to difficulty level compared to raid stuff a lot as well, and so I'm not sure where that will end up yet as well, and so maybe this works out fine. I don't know. It like doing 20 keys. It kind of depends on if they're as difficult as doing 20 keys at the very start of an expansion or a season compared to 20 keys of right now, or if they're closer to like 15s or something where they're more reasonably doable for, I would say, most mythic, especially cutting edge raiders. So,
All true. And Mythic Plus has actually had quite an eye on it where I mean they've kind of split it up where you can approach a couple of keys over the weekend. Um, people in that community are speculating that they just aren't ready to test all those dungeons at once, or there's also the thought that well maybe they're trying to focus on just two at a time to make sure that they get everything right.
well,
I
and
don't.
for the dungeons won't be in the first Mythic Plus season, right? So getting the four that will be immediately like I feel like is a higher priority anyway. So making sure that those ones are really good. Like they have a whole another, you know, 3 to 6 months probably to get the other four ready to go. So
Yeah, that's true. Well, I mean personally I'm not a big fan of doing keys on the beta. When they when they announced the first Thundering affix, I avoided that like the plague. But they have changed it up a little bit. They've made it a bit more friendly. There's now a kiss curse aspect to it, where
mm-hmm.
you have a long time to clear this debuff. Where you're going to go out on 4 of the 5 dungeon players, and 2 people are going to be marked with Mark of Storm, the other Mark of Lightning, I want to say. It's very obvious. You can see right over their head, there's like a little ball of wind or a ball of lightning, and you want to match up with the opposing one. And then if you don't end up doing that, you get stunned and you take like a giant ticking dot over 8 seconds, and it feels very frustrating. It's not something you want to happen to you. I've had a lot of fun watching streamers try this out, and you watch them and they like somehow don't notice the giant Uyghur in the middle of their screen that's like counting down and it's glowing as it gets closer, and then they realize it last second and they don't make it in time. It's very funny to watch. But I unfortunately will feel that pain coming soon as well. I will have
Oh
to
no.
experience it, but I do like the concept that it does at least give you some benefit where you'll have, I think it was increased damage and healing, I want to say.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Increased damage
Uh,
and healing by 15% for 15 seconds.
yep. I I definitely like it better than the previous one. I will say that for sure. It seems fine. Like the damage buff is just kind of like it's a little bit boring, similar to the tier sets, but like doesn't have to be anything more fancy than that to me. So, yep, it's fine. It's little something you do, little mini game you play. You get to do some damage. I have yet to see whether it's on like a global timer of when these come out, something like quaking versus like randomly kind of. Um, or if it's maybe tied to count in the dungeon somehow, like every 10% count or something, 5% count. I don't know. If there's some way of controlling it, because like being able to have that going into certain big pulls or certain bosses might make a big difference, especially for like super high key pushing or super like MDI speedruns or something. So I'm curious if they make a way that it's somewhat consistently semi controllable, or if it's just going to be kind of purely random, or if it's going to be on some global timer thing. Uh, I don't think they've yet figured that out entirely yet, but
Well, I think I think it's more like quaking based on the testing that I was watching. And yeah, you're
mm,
right. They might not have figured it out just yet, but the reason I mention that is I think it works well that it lasts that long, where if you have a big mechanic occurring at that time, you can comfortably deal with the mechanic and then group up and handle it. Thinking back to how Quaking worked, where, you know, everybody in their iron docks, last boss, when you're all
yeah,
brought back to the very edge of the boat and you all have Quaking on you and it just kills everybody, that's really frustrating. And so, obviously, I don't think that there are any grouping mechanics that you to stand on top of each other, which would potentially cause issues because I don't even know if you join like if two positives match up in the with this affix. I don't think it has a negative effect. So I wonder if you all just like run on top of each other, at least from what I've seen. But again, this is all just for testing. But the reason I say that I don't think it's for count is one, I watched it happen as people were walking up to a pack. It wasn't like after they had killed a mob or anything like that.
right. That was kind of like a suggestion rather than a this is how it currently works. It didn't seem to necessarily be a global timer like quaking because it seemed if if it was the global timer was inconsistent basically based on what I was seeing people doing so far. So maybe it has like a variable timer of like it can proc anytime within this 15-second window or something. I don't know.
Yeah, like kind of like quaking, I guess then. But yeah, because quicking it can occur. It's like a time frame of something like a minute, and every 15 seconds is a potential occurrence of it, or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers. Maybe it was 12 seconds, but I have a weak order that shows me, and I just look at the line and know when there's a chance for it to come. But the reason I would dissuade them from actually taking your advice in terms of count is a lot of tanks have spoken out about the whole prideful affix and
Right.
how they really dislike that. Where, if you accidentally pull one extra mob, there's like a lot of calculation you need to do, try to get a prideful buff, bring it into the boss that you want to bring it into, type of thing.
Right. That's fair. I agree with that.
Yeah, so who knows, however they're going to approach it. I really like the fact that there's a kiss aspect to the kiss curse now instead of just a curse. I don't know why a singular curse would ever be considered, so I'm glad they avoided it.
Yeah, it's
And
I mean that's kind of what the affixes are, but I think a lot of the affixes are just not that fun in general, so yeah.
that's the point, is
I
like,
hope this leads them to reworking a lot more of those affixes also personally.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, this concept that, they very quickly saw that people didn't want to deal with that, right? That this curse alone wasn't good. And then it's kind of like, okay, well, we have been dealing with these affixes Granted, they're not nearly as impactful, but they some of them certainly are, right? Some a lot more than others. Maybe you turn your eyes towards that as well, because
Yeah, I think
all
some of the most fun keys that I've done in the past have been basically like level 2 keys where you're just going in and speedrunning them and you're not worrying about the affixes and things like that. I feel like that's a lot closer to what keys should be compared to the and then make it a race against the timer, in that and make it a tough timer to beat, instead of being 41-minute timers, make it like 25 minutes and make me beat the timer. Like that would be fun. But yeah, I don't know. Personally, that would be more my style. I like challenge modes, I guess, more than Mythic Plus personally. I don't know.
that's
That's kind of
true.
a subjective thing. There are certainly some people out there that love pushing high keys and stuff like that. So I think just both should be played up more. And I feel like Mythic Plus is currently kind of veered too much into following kind of just one side of that personally. But oh well.
It's definitely interesting because I think there's the damage aspect to beating a key, but I think about the higher keys that I've done and the lethality of certain abilities that you just really need to avoid because when they're tuned up that high, it's just that much of a problem, or the affixes make it just that much worse. That, I agree. I think that if it came down to just how well you played your class and how geared your character was, that might be a bit more enjoyable. We'd have to see. I don't know. But my point being, I agree with you. I don't think affixes are the answer, at least this time.
At least the current affixes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that they already started to take some out.
Hmm.
That's a good thing. We'll just see how they iterate on it over the course of the expansion. Um, but instead of looking to the next expansion, we can kind of reflect on how this one has gone, more specifically this patch. And I know you kind of wanted to look at some of the Shadowlands bosses. You can actually swap over here and show the link. This is something that I feel like everybody's doing now, right? They're making their tier lists.
Mhm.
How are we approaching this? Are we voting on them in their current fated form, how they were to progress? Are we judging them based off of their position in the raid? How are we doing this?
I mean, you kind of have to take into account their position in the raid, I think, for sure. I personally would vote them mainly on progress and somewhat farm within their current tier. So, like, but not the faded versions. Personally, the
Okay.
faded versions I'm just kind of ignoring entirely because depending on which affixes they had at which times and whatnot, and which combinations before they got tuning or after they got tuning, like, it's too much of a mess, and they all felt kind of like the faded stuff didn't really benefit or hurt any of them specifically too much. Stuff like Lehuvum having the dispel soaks and the timers being all messed up, that's
Ooh,
kind of a
yeah.
negative. But like aside from those like kind of exceptions that had negatives, the rest felt all kind of about the same to me, personally. But um
Okay.
should we just go in order starting with Shriekwing in Nathria?
I think that we could. So just so I fully understand, I'm judging this build based on how it was to progress, and then
Yeah, I would say
also,
maybe like 75% how it was to prog and like 25% how it was on farm is kind of like how I'm mentally weighting it in my mind, roughly.
okay, and I think that when we're discussing each one, we should probably go over any unique experiences we had with the boss, because at least for a lot of Castle Nathra, you and I didn't
We were
see
in
these
separate
bosses
guilds.
together. Yeah, literally
Yes.
just Sire was all that we pulled together
Hmm.
in the group. So, Shriekwing, anything that stood out for you? How'd you feel it was as a first boss?
Um, I didn't like the intermission phase where you weren't really able to damage him, but it wasn't that much of a negative for me, and it was kind of fun to dodge around the stuff at the same time. Um, it felt fine for a first boss. I would give this like a solid B, I would say. Not quite A level where it's like exceptionally amazing, but for a first boss especially, it didn't really do anything negative, and I would be happy to play it pretty much on a regular basis, I think so.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because so when I first progressed it, I was in a group that had only ever done heroic boss kills, really, like maybe the first couple mythic at the very end of an expansion, and I remember we were like rekilling it because as we were progressing through the raid, that's what we chose to do was we would like progress a wing or something like that, and I just remember there was one time where I decided not to call anything for that boss, which seems very reasonable. There's not a lot to
Yes.
call for it. Man, that was the worst pull I've ever watched. It was so quiet when it finally died. There was like 2 people left alive that killed it. And I just remember I vowed that I would never let it go quiet again in that raid for
I
that boss.
This is maybe a weird take. I think a first boss where it can go to complete chaos and it just be a complete mess and there's stuff all over the ground, but that you can still kill the boss pretty fine. I think that's perfect for a first boss. I think that's exactly what a first boss should be, where you can have some fun, you can have some laughter, everything can go poorly, but like it's a first boss. It's just to get your foot in the door and like it's mostly just a DPS damage check or whatever, where it's like, did you do some heroic raids before coming in here? If yes, congratulations, you can kill the boss. So that's yeah, I think that's like the perfect story for what a first boss should give you in terms of an experience.
It's funny because I can definitely give you an experience on both Vigilant and Terragru where it was a shit show, but the boss died.
Yup.
So, is that actually where we should go next? Should we go first bosses and progress that way, or do you want to stick in Nathria? Because I'm good either way.
I don't care either way.
All right, then we're going to Huntsman.
Okay.
Ooh, Huntsman. I not a difficult mechanical boss, but one where you quickly learned the people in your group that were capable of understanding a mechanic versus those that were not. I don't know how half credit did when progressing it, but I
I
remember
was in
from.
a different guild before half credit for these first three actually.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So I'm assuming that based on how Huntsman went, you decided to swap off of half credit then.
I was trying to remember. I'm not sure if the guild died on Hungering Destroyer or after Hungering Destroyer, or if I left. But it was pretty close to dying either way, I think. So that might tell you something. Basically, they got pretty hard walled around Hungering Destroyer. Basically, yeah.
Gotcha.
Um, for me, Huntsman, I don't think he was like exceptionally fun in any real way. I think he did get a little more fun on farm, where you could kind of just start skipping the mechanics. I feel
True.
like he's also kind of just like a B, maybe a C. I don't know. I feel kind of meh.
Yeah, I also feel meh. I personally just feel like a B is a perfect rating for it though. Um,
There wasn't really much super negative that I would say C. Yeah, I think B is fair.
yeah, it literally was just a second boss in my mind. You know, like it did require the coordination of being able to CC, and some people's cases not breaking that CC. Not to name any names, myself included, um, but yeah,
If you know, you know.
yeah, if you know, you know. And it was the funny part of I remember early on they had to adjust how it was displayed on Warcraft logs because the dogs took double damage after they had been CC'd for so long, and it was like if that's included, then it's all about the dog damage type of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I kind of feel like leaving it there. But Hungering Destroyer. I enjoyed this. Um, I think this is one where Dispriest really shined, just because that worked through the healing debuff aspect of
Mm-hmm.
it. I felt very useful being a shaman. That was
Mm-hmm.
where I first felt like I learned about the true value of Spirit Link. This was the first expansion I'd ever played shaman. Um, I liked it. I liked that there could be really, really high levels of coordination if you put into it, or that you could really control the fight based on what you were saying. Because at the
Mm-hmm.
time, I was raid leading from outside the raid for this one, and the group that I was running. It felt very cool to be able to do that kind of experience mythic raiding in that way. But also, it was simple enough that if you had talented players, it was just gonna die.
Yeah, I think comparing it to like a patchwork, I think I liked probably Shriekwing and Sledgefist a bit better for this raid, and kind of Artificer Zymox a bit too, personally. Although that was much fairly different from a patchwork considering the mechanics it had. Um, I think I'm also about a B on this one. I didn't have like the most fun progressing it, but my group was also getting walled on this one and kind of maxing out that their uh, complexity that they could handle and whatnot. So I think that probably diminished him a little bit in my mind, probably more so than he needed to. He was definitely fine on farm, and when we've gone back and killed him as a higher progressed group and things like that. So I think overall he's about the same so far.
Yeah, this B tier is getting pretty thick. wonder if this is gonna be the most filled out tier after rating all these bosses. We'll have to
Probably.
see.
I feel like we're very like mid-tempered people for the most part. We don't really have too many extreme opinions a lot of times, but
Yeah. Well, Enerva is one where I feel like I I have to give a slightly negative take on it.
oh,
It was weird that you would run 3 healers on it and that the canisters didn't play any role really in how the fight was played, at least on Mythic. You
I
didn't want to drain anything.
I'm surprised you have a negative feeling because I would have rated this the first A. I liked this boss a lot. I don't really know why. I think I liked the orb mechanic. Yeah, the canisters were kind of boring, but I mean, I liked soaking the little puddles. I liked having some ad stick leave. I don't know. I had fun on this boss. I liked this boss a lot.
Yeah, to be fair, it was fun to heal in a 3 heal environment. Um, that was enjoyable. It was cool that you could have a unique impact in terms of being able to soak the bottles appropriately, in terms of the ad placements, the kicks, that you also had to knock out the beam or like the little balls with the beams and the
Hmm.
geometry to it. Man, I was 21st raid leading this fight, watching a actually at the time I was watching a Resto Shaman do it from his POV. And I just remember him having that mechanic, running out there, being the person that was supposed to line up with 2 of the different orbs at the time,
Hmm.
because that's the way it works. And man, he wasn't getting it, and I could not verbally explain to him. And it was just one of those like horror films where you just slowly watch the raid die, and you knew that this person was going to be the cause of it, and there wasn't anything you could do. Which is partially why I rate it so low in my mind. But maybe that makes it a B because you say A, I say C.
Okay, I'm a little sad, but I'll accept that.
Yeah, well, we'll have to compromise later. But
I'm
Sun
sure.
King, all right. As a DPS player, I have to hear your takes on Sun King Salvation.
This is like a hard D boss. I
Sting.
don't have fun playing this boss, except for the like 5 second window where his shields are up, and I feel like what I'm doing actually matters. But all the rest of the time, I'm either clicking a pedestal and then hands off keyboard for 10 seconds, or I'm not hitting stuff to try and not kill it, or I'm CCing phoenixes, or moving and interrupting my casts to dodge frontals, and like I don't care. This boss is awful. But I'm sure healers probably had fun pumping in like the lusts and whatnot. But yeah, as a DPS, it was fun for like 10 seconds at a time, and then very boring for the other 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm interested just because I've always healed this boss. I don't think I've ever DPS'd it, not even once, because any character that I was playing that had an off-spec healer, like you just kind of went healer that fight. You
Yeah,
overhealed it
people
for the
were
sake of
like
it.
six healing it. Yeah, just for the
Makes it go
pushing it faster.
faster. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
But it was so interesting because I kind of got like a little peek into what it was like as a DPS player, where if you didn't have PI, you weren't really going to parse well, at least in the fight.
Mm-hmm.
It was the one that a lot of people looked at. They were like, "Oh, okay, well, can you heal? This is a heal fight type of thing." And if you didn't, oh well, sucks to be you. But I've always thought to myself, like, man, I'm sitting here pressing 1 or 2 buttons over and over and over to heal this one guy up, and I'm watching the rest of the raid die around me because my heals matter more on this guy to push him sooner. Like, yeah, I would definitely toss out some heals on the raid or drop an AoE heal, but kind of hurt to not be helping the rest of the group, trying to
I
heal this
see.
one guy to push it to the next phase, hoping that we push it fast enough. All the little cheese where there's like prop paladins and guardian druids that are doing lots and lots of healing the
Yep.
fight. I don't know. I really didn't enjoy it. I agree with you. This should be in D tier.
Amazing.
Actually, the only other thing I will mention is you talked about the shields. There's a healing shield too, and I'll be honest, I've forgotten about that entirely. Like, I don't think there was ever a healing shield that I had to worry about.
Mm.
Not even once. Partially because you threw like just a guardian spirit on it at that time, and it just took increased healing. But man, that just didn't matter at all. So I don't know. Happy to move on from it. I like the fact that they tried to make a healer catered fight, but honestly, make more
Yeah.
Rygolons. That was really fun. when we get to
they've
that.
they've done healer focused fights in the past. This style of it where it's like an ad fight and it's like the DPS what they're doing doesn't matter at all and it's just a healer fight. I think is the poor way of doing it. I think there's some better examples of healer fights that I think like Prototype Pantheon is actually a lot better of a healer fight than Sun King, for example, where the DPS are doing something that matters the whole time while the healers are doing the important thing in phase 2 and phase 3 and stuff, right? So,
That's true. Also, the bad push timings where if you got the infusers still during the intermission. Oh, anyways,
yeah.
we move on from that. We move on to Shadowlands Castle Nathria Zymox.
I don't think it's quite an S tier for me, but it's pretty close. I think
Interesting.
it's I think it is very top of A tier probably for me. I could probably be argued into S actually. I enjoyed this boss a lot, especially Prog, especially. Um, Farm it was kind of whatever. After they fixed the having to wait for the push timing boss percentage thing, it got better on Farm, but for a little while on Farm it wasn't that great. But Prog especially, it felt really fun to figure out the different patterns that you had to do because you actually had to play pretty much all of them, and you sometimes had to back up somebody else's seed, um, or just know how to be able to do a seed even if you weren't one of the main people assigned to it, and stuff like that. And if you got a ghost versus if you didn't get a ghost, then sometimes you had to do your different patterns differently because you had an immunity versus didn't have an immunity because you had to immune a ghost or something. Like, I don't know. I really enjoyed this fight. Um, yeah. Overall, I think solid A. I could probably be argued into S though.
That's funny. So I would agree with A. I don't think S, but I think A for its position in the raid where it's a potential second boss if you wanted it to be, but also could be a little bit later. I think that was a like that whole concept that they allow you to pick your pathing in terms of the raid is great. That it's not like you kill one, then you have to kill two, and then once you kill two, you kill three. Um, Great spot in the raid. I have multiple takes just because I progressed it myself. I joined or I was trialing in a guild while progressing this, and then I also raid led for this one. And so that my trialing experience, I just remember thinking to myself, like I was nervous. First time I'd ever really heal in the raid. That was the first boss I actually progressed because the group had killed the all the other bosses. Like they killed Sun King, they killed Minerva. So then it was Zymox before Council. I just
Mhm.
remember regressing Zymox. Like I was nervous, I was scared, but it felt really fun. I had some very important interactions. I had to be, dropping the Windrush totem so that we were safe from the annihilation. There was the countdown for that. It was a great fight in my opinion. I just remember looking at all the people that were doing seeds and I was thinking to myself, wow, those are really, really good players. And then so I had to raid lead it. And so I had to pick the players I was going to put in that position. I was going to pick the more trustworthy players and all that. And then I ended up watching a video on how it was that somebody would do a seed. I just remember looking at how a DK would do it. And I realized there wasn't anything to worry about for a Death Knight.
Yeah.
And I had been raid leading for 2 or 3 Death Knights that just could not do the seeds. And it was another turning point in my realization. I was like, wow, there are just some people that need a little extra help when they're raiding. Cool.
Yeah, there was definitely some very big class differences in handling the seeds that I felt personally. But that's okay.
Yeah. Shall we move on to council?
I don't know where I would end up on this one. I have to think for a minute because I think for the difficulty it was, I found it pretty fun. It wasn't much of a council fight, which is kind of weird. It felt more like just 3 different single target bosses. The last phase also felt weird with like the gargoyles that then you just like did a dance phase in the middle of a gargoyle, just kind of standing there frozen as a way to kill him, and like or kiting him before that. I don't know. It felt a little weird. It's not S for sure, I think, but I didn't really have any like negatives about it. I felt like it was mostly fun to progress. If you didn't have people that could grip in or like boomkins to kill all the waiters, that got kind of annoying at some points. Um, I don't know. I'm probably A or B ish on this one.
I think Um,
It's definitely not a strong A, I feel like.
yeah, I would definitely say either a weak A or a strong B. Um, this fight, I felt like the best points were when mechanics were overlapping and it was incredibly hectic. Like, you've got the dancer and the boss where people are walking their circle, whatever that's called. You've got in the mythic version where some of them have to be jumping. And so if you were the individual choosing who was jumping, that was entertaining because you had to pick people that weren't walking around the boss. Um, it was incredibly hectic with, like you said, waiters all around. You've got the guy that runs in and puts a beam on the boss so that you can't kill him. That guy runs in. Um, I thought that the intermission was actually warranted because of the anxiety that you would feel on that fight with how hectic some things would
I
get.
never really minded the intermissions. I think they could have been a little shorter, like probably just do 4 instead of like 6. But other than that, they felt like they were good little breathers in between the bosses. Actually, yeah, I liked the intermission phases, and getting a damage buff or haste buff or whatever it was also pretty fun.
Yeah, I don't know where I would rank it. I feel like largely your experience on this boss was dependent upon the skill of your tanks. And it's funny
Hmm.
because I don't think that there were many good tanks that I progressed this with.
Yes, it was very frustrating progressing this boss and getting all the way to phase 3 several pulls, and then oh, the tank died, go again, and then oh, tank died again, we gotta go again, and just doing that for like probably 10 or 15 times before we finally killed the boss. That was very frustrating when it's, as a DPS, I'm just sitting there doing the same thing 15 pulls in a row, and eventually we just kill the boss because of the tanks finally not dying. I don't know. That was probably not a positive experience, but other
And
than that, it
yeah,
wasn't. It wasn't also that bad at the same time.
when you finally did kill it, it felt so
It was
relieving.
satisfying, yes.
It was very satisfying, which is the only thing that makes me think that it should deserve a slightly better ranking. I think that for its position in the raid, its difficulty for the average cutting edge group was very good. I liked its position in the raid, difficulty, all that aspect. So that's why I would say high B, low A. Where would you prefer to put it?
I think I would give it an A, but below Zymox for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. We'll end up doing it if we do look back at it. It's up to you. But where we have closer to the A is better, and further from the letters worse. But
Yeah, I mean B, I'm not probably gonna sort, but like for now, like S and A we could probably sort, and I don't know,
it's
everything in D
true.
is like probably equally bad to me. Okay, Sludge Fist.
Sludge
This is like
Fist.
an easy S for me. uh, I like the damage boost phases. I like the timers being a little bit different, so you had to manage your cooldowns differently. I liked the chain mechanic. I liked that you had to dodge stuff with the chains. I liked that you had to soak stuff with the chains. I didn't really like the chain slam. That mechanic was kind of not fun. If you had enough boomkins or whatever that they could just all get paired up and just like bark skin and ignore that mechanic, that was one option. But I felt like that was overly punishing for a lot of other people. Um, Especially if you ever got paired to like a disc priest or something that they were just standing still the whole time and you just had to do all the movements yourself around them in your little circle leash range around them. Um, I don't know. This boss is just super fun, super throughput heavy. It's like great patchwork. It mattered a lot on Prog. You basically everybody that killed it like as he's slamming into the wall pretty much and hits the enrage. I thought it was tuned perfectly and yeah, just super fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to progress this on my shaman. Actually, never ended up getting a kill of it on my shaman. Um, but did raid lead it. I played a little bit of it on a Resto Druid. Ended up getting a kill, but I wasn't very impactful in the kill. But even in my time with Faded and all that, I definitely agree. Sludge Fist, great concept, great boss, great tuning. Yeah, amazing. But then get to SLG. And I personally was not a fan of SLG. I um I joined a guild that died on SLG, and then I hopped over to the group that you were currently in and just skipped it entirely, which I was content with.
Uh-huh. This might be a weird take. I'm going to put it not in D, but in C.
I think
Um,
C is perfectly fine. Yeah,
I it wasn't as bad, I think, as it's been made out. It's definitely been way overblown in the community as like this is the worst boss ever. It is not that. um, I liked having like a little bit of two target cleave and stuff like that. It was definitely, especially on Prague, very punishing, overly punishing, and frustrating to do certain things. Like the winds pushing you back was very annoying. The crystallized soaks were pretty annoying. The blades just randomly like one-shotting half your raid, especially with the dunk timings and stuff, was very annoying. Um, but the upheaval mechanic I thought was good. The like ground earthquake soak things I think was good. A lot of P2 was way better than P1 basically, except for like the wind pushback I think. Um, and then P3 was really fun, except it only lasted like 30 seconds and then the boss was dead. I wish P3 would have lasted longer. Um, but I liked the Goliath phases for the most part, and it's also frustrating that Draven would sometimes not bring down the ads enough, like fast enough. So yeah, I don't know. It's definitely not the worst boss of all time, but it's also not. It wasn't that fun, and it had a lot of downside things. But none of them were like super bad, I guess.
I think what I would have preferred is if emphasis was more on the bosses and less on the intermissions. I think that
Yeah,
was the biggest issue was that the
it was almost
intermissions were
half and half.
very, very
Yeah.
difficult. And I compare Prague SLG, Farm SLG to Faded SLG, and I think Faded SLG did a very good job because with the cheese that you could just bop or bubble as a paladin and walk in and out of it a couple times and finish that phase, it kind of showed you it's like, oh, this fight can be enjoyable as
Mm-hmm.
long as the intermissions aren't what's ruining your group.
Right.
So I don't know. I think C is a perfectly fine rating for it. Um, yeah, I wouldn't change anything about that. But Sire is a different fight entirely. What do you
I think
think?
Sire is probably an S with the one caveat that the lag in phase one and having to hold DPS a little bit on Prague felt not that great. But once you got into P2 and P3, banger. Fire boss would progress all the time. Had fun like almost the entire 200 falls or whatever. Thumbs up. It's probably still an S for me.
Yeah, I hope that the last boss of this next raid, Razageth, or however it's pronounced, is anything like Sire. Uh, barring the lag, I agree. I think that is the one thing that kind of kills it for some people. The like throwing your camera around, lifting up in the air. Like, I felt like it worked really really well in phase three, but phase one it felt frustrating to deal with. Um, but yeah, I honestly don't feel like there's much more that needs to be said about it, unless you have anything to say.
Nope, not really.
Hair grew as we move on to Sanctum.
Um, I think he's at least a B, but he's maybe borderline A for me. Uh,
Really,
yeah, I like the Torghast powers. It was just a fun gimmick, and I like the intermission phase. I like the like enrage phase at the end, and all the little buffs you could get with like teaming up with people or re-rolling your buffs and stuff like that. We didn't really do them that often. We never really like super omega cheesed him to parse or kill him like super fast or anything across all 20 people. But even without that, I think he was fun enough.
I think I might put him a little bit lower than you, but I'll compromise for B. The reason being, I really didn't like that there were some powers that were just duds, and I know that you could re-roll them,
Mm-hmm.
but there were some powers that were really, really strong. Some that were basically necessary if you wanted to progress in a reasonable manner. Not that you couldn't otherwise, like you definitely could, but my point being, you didn't want to have like a mage ice blocking the grip and all that stuff. You had to have the
Mm-hmm.
heart one, whatever that was called, ever beating heart.
Yep,
But the
and the one that
fact,
removed your stacks on the debuffs and stuff.
yeah, and then there's some that just there were powers that just didn't do anything. That felt really
Some were
unfun.
like you, your jumps are now giant or something,
Oh
and
my
other
god.
weird stuff. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Some of the powers were very good, some weren't.
I
Perfectly
think
fine first
that's fair
boss.
criticism. Yeah,
Yeah. Um moving on to Eye of the Jailer. Thoughts?
I think I'm also borderline A and B on this one.
I
I think it
think
got a lot more fun on farm, but it was still pretty fun on prog,
I think
although
it
it was
was
pretty short.
fun. Yeah, I would personally put it at A, largely because there was like a bunch of different ways to do it, where
Hmm.
you could like have your groups fully swapping. You could do the I think what we did was we had like our ranged players stand in the middle and swap over to the side that would do best to kind of finish off the ads. Yeah, there was just a bunch of different ways to do it. There was the fun at the end, like most people lusted it, but you know, when you weren't lusting it, there was the fun of like, okay, there's like a legit damage check here, and I can't help you by healing you because every other second you're getting a healing debuff that increases by 10%. So
The one feedback I would say is I feel like his platform was just too big to move
that's
around.
true. That's true.
And whenever he did like the big giant black laser thing that like sweeps over the whole platform and you either immuned it or like soul shaped across it for the dangerous among us or the people that took the chain, I felt like that just took a little bit too long uh every single time and that was kind of annoying. And it felt fine for like the intermissions, but then the ads for the intermissions also spawned like really far away from where you were standing. So I think if his platform could have just been shrunk a bit, I don't know, 30%, 50%, somewhere in that range, uh, would have been a solid A for me. But
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that all those are valid. Those are all valid points to make about this boss. I agree. Smaller platform would have just been a bit more enjoyable. Less time just running around in
mhm,
general.
yep.
The 9.
I think this is a solid A, and maybe it's probably not S. It's probably A. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely
I
not
think
S.
I think A, just because it actually like there was supposed to be a lot of things going on. It wasn't all that difficult. There was some healer coordination that felt fun in terms of the dispelling. A little frustrating when somebody didn't know that they had the debuff on them and had to run out. At least from my experience with it. But
I feel like some of the timers on this were like too set in stone
yes,
and like they were at some points too slow almost like having more mechanics would have made the boss more fun even though it would have been harder, but sometimes I felt like there was just not much going on for like 10 or 15 seconds at a time, and like I like that, but on this type of boss I felt like it needed to be a bit more active and hectic, I think.
I think it was well tuned difficulty wise, at least for its position in the raid though.
I
Like I
also
think that if it were
I hated
later,
the damage debuff shield thing. That mechanic should just have been deleted. That was pointless.
yeah, that I agree that didn't really feel like it provided any benefit other than hey, does your tank know to bring it out of this? Obviously, we're talking about mythic progression. Yeah, they knew, but like when you're in a you're in a pug and they're just sitting there like just whacking away, not looking at the numbers they're doing. It's like, hey man, just rip you out of this bubble real fast and don't run back in, please. But yeah, I think lower tier A probably is
Yeah.
appropriate position for it. What about for Remnant?
Mm, I think I'm a B on this one. I didn't hate
B.
it, but I didn't really find much of it enjoyable either. I think it was just okay.
I personally liked healing this one a lot. I like the intricacy of the tanks learning how to hit all
The
the
orbs, yeah,
orbs appropriately. I like the dispelling aspect and the grouping up and the timings because each dispel was slightly different, at least with what you had to deal with around you. Like, okay, first time it's very simple. You just dispel right after the beam. The next time, yeah, it's very close to that, but then you've also got swirlies. And then there's the next time there's supposedly swirlies around you while you're trying to dispel. And but the thing was like managing farm of this boss was frustrating because higher damage meant worse experience.
timings, yeah.
So meh.
I
But
also I also am kind of concerned at like the way it worked out was that they let the mass dispel strat like continue working basically, and I'm not sure that they intended the mass dispel strat to work from the beginning. And I think this boss would have been a lot less fun if you had to double ping pong every single dispel set. So I think the mass dispel strat kind of like saved this boss from being a lot worse than it was.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that for sure. I would not enjoy ping ponging every single dispel. True. What about full render?
I think Soul Render is a solid A for me.
Awesome. I agree.
Definitely more fun than the B bosses, but definitely not up there with the S bosses for me. I liked AoEing. I liked doing big numbers. I liked the little safety dance slices, and having to plan some movement around that and the different patterns. I thought the chain breaks were fine as a mechanic. Yeah, most of this was like some of the ads were a little annoying the way they worked with like you couldn't really group them up and like a blood DK was kind of pretty required to do this boss in a way that felt good. That's kind of the one main downside I would say, but other than that, I felt like this boss was pretty good.
Yeah, the necessity of a DK in this fight was the only part I think that I view as unenjoyable. The rest I felt like was really great. I loved healing it. Um, I loved dodging all the mechanics that the mechanics that were on this fight felt like perfect mechanics for a boss, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some personal responsibility, some coordination. You got one person that can like lead all the safety dances if you want it to be done that way. The safety dances weren't too difficult by any means. They were honestly like just perfect in my mind. So yeah. What about Painsmith?
Easy S tier boss for
Yep.
me.
Thank goodness. S tier all the
Super
way.
super fun to progress even though it was really hard. I liked the difficulty. I was sad when they made it easier every time. I liked the balls in both phases. I liked having to gateway over the spikes and not having a gap. Um I liked the little burst AoE coming out of the intermissions. The intermissions felt a little long sometimes. I felt like they could have been maybe a couple spike phases shorter, but other than that, it wasn't really too bad. And yeah, it just felt super fun. Uh, Chains and traps were different for ranged and melee. Ranged definitely had a much harder time on this fight. Let me just put that out there. But
Mm.
uh, yeah, overall, I thought it was pretty fun. I liked the spikes mechanic and the grid, and I hope they use similar mechanics and get inspired by this boss to do uh, more stuff like that in the future.
Yeah. To this day though, you and I still disagree about the best timing to use your turtle. But hey,
I
that's okay.
I I value well, and especially on Prog, I valued making DPS checks higher than uh making my survivability like a little bit better. And uh at the time I was also playing Kyrian, and now I'm playing Night Fae as well, so I can soul shape over them and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agreed a little bit to try and hold my turtle as much as possible, but yeah,
But all in all, it was a really, really good boss.
yes,
For its position in the raid, maybe it could have been like a seventh or eighth boss, in my
I
opinion.
could have been the
But
second to last boss, and
yeah,
almost it could have been the last boss. I think it was
mm,
close to that good.
maybe if it had a bit more complexity, something like that, a little bit more in terms of like, uh,
I think for melee especially, it would have needed one more mechanic other than
yes,
traps or something. Yeah.
yes, I agree with that. But great boss. What do you think of Guardian, the first ones?
This is a tough one because I don't want to take his undertuning into account as much, and I want to see the boss for what it could have been, kind of. But at the same time, that feels unfair. So I do kind of have to drop it a little bit. If it was tuned to be at the level of Sludgefist, I think it would have been possibly an S tier boss. I think because it was so undertuned, it probably drops down to like an A or even a B for me.
Yep, I'm actually gonna toss a top B personally right now.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
But uh, but yeah, I honestly don't know
Ooh.
what else to say other than the tragedy that was its tuning literally was the downfall. Otherwise, it would just be perfect. Um, Fate Scribe. Oh boy.
I think C.
Yeah,
I
I
liked the ring mechanic a lot. I wish you would have had to do them properly and actually use two people sometimes. I think that's the main thing. I felt like the non-ring phases were too long and the ring phases themselves were too short, and it felt like too few people had to do the rings because of that. and they were just sitting there hitting ads for a lot of the time and stuff. There was a lot of movement and a lot of just like outranging yourself of your whole raid team and the boss. A lot of times, the tank mechanic was kind of boring, kiting the ad around and stuff. I don't know. The rings itself were a really good mechanic, and I felt like a lot of the other mechanics alongside of it kind of took away from the coolness of the rings as a mechanic.
Yeah, Grim Important kind of made you realize, wow, there are
I,
some people that struggle, huh?
yeah.
I, yeah, but honestly, I I like the intermission phase. I don't like how far it made people spread out. Like I think if the room, um, like the radius of each ring was shrunk down just a little bit, I feel like it would have
Mm-hmm.
been a more enjoyable fight, at least a heal.
Or if they could have moved a little faster when you were on them.
That would shorten the ring phase too, but yes,
Yeah.
that's yeah. I don't know. I definitely agree that two people in a ring could have been a thing.
Like, well, so like, I would rather each individual rune locking thing be shorter and the rings move faster, but then have to do it, let's say, twice. So, like, one group does a first set, and then a second group does the second set, and that way more people are participating as well in doing them.
Yeah, yeah,
And then maybe the first people can't be, like, they can only be a second person or something. I don't know how that would. Anyway, but we're getting too into theoretical territory, I think.
yeah. Also, well, that's true, but also like, did the person that could do the mechanic get it, or did the person that can't do it get the
Mm-hmm.
mechanic? And did that mean that you killed the boss type of thing?
Right, that's true.
And the last phase is just a burn, and yeah, I agree. A lot of the other mechanics in this fight took away from it. I think that the concept of the ad chasing around the tank and the explosion of that was cool. I think the like rings that you dropped around the boss, that was really
Yeah,
dumb. I
those were
wish there
boring.
was
Yeah.
I wish it just had a higher health pool to account for not having to do that or something. But then again, it's a eighth boss in the raid and it felt very
or
relatively
or
easy.
make those like Grimportant or something where you have to drop them on a specific rune or something
Ooh,
instead of just like around the outside somewhere.
that would have
I
been
don't know.
good. Would have been good. But don't need to relish on that one. How about KT?
I think this one's a D for me. Especially on Prague, it was really bad. It got better on Farm, but not great. It was still pretty bad on Farm. Uh, Too much time killing tank ads, too much time not killing ads, and then needing to kill ads in a really short 5 to 10 second window, and like the spikes were just boring. The silences were just boring. You just all stacked them in the same spot. Uh, the downstairs phase probably had the most fun, but then they also just stacked and ran in a circle, and then it depended on whether you had cooldowns that you waited long enough for boomkins to just like kill it. Yeah, it was just not great.
A weird fight altogether. I honestly don't have any comments about it, but
I
beyond what
thought
you've said.
the idea of killing the boss multiple times and it getting like a little bit harder each time with like additional, like now the mechanics, instead of being 2 spikes it's 3 and then 4 and then 5 or whatever. I thought that was like kind of a neat idea. Also, the downstairs phases being like 40%, 40%, 20% is like a weird split instead of them being even, that you needed less people on the last one. Like there was so much weirdness with, I just don't understand the decisions they made on this boss, that yeah, I think it wasn't like entirely flawed, but it was definitely not fun to play in practice.
If it was more on rails, couldn't be cheesed, and the mechanics actually changed in difficulty with each kill. Well, on top of, so
Yeah,
yeah, only killing it 3 times as opposed to four. I think that that would
that
have been
also
a
would have
much better
helped a lot.
boss.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's in D tier. What about Sylve?
I think Heroic Sylve would have been probably in like C for me, maybe B. Phase 3 is pretty fun. And then, but Phase 1 and Phase 2 were awful. And then Mythic Sylve made Phase 1 a lot better, still not great, but a lot better. And then the rives are still way too long. They don't need to be like 30 or 45 seconds or whatever.
You just had
P2 is,
three. Just three rives.
yeah, something like that. Yeah. And then phase 2 is also still better, but also still not great.
Yep.
I think it moves it up. It's probably like, but phase 3 is so good. Is the problem. Is phase 3 is like one of the best phases they've made, I think, ever. I I think it ends up probably at an A for me. I think
Yeah.
probably like below Zymox is where I would put it, but above Council.
I I actually fully agree with that. I think the last phase is what really made that fight. And if you're in a group that didn't just kill it the first time you got to the end of the fight, it you felt it. And man, was that enjoyable. Like the tuning of it. That you saw the final raise that destroyed the last platform and you didn't kill it. That was like the wake up call. It's like, okay, now it's time to optimize and we go from there. That was honestly really, really good fight. Uh, ranking them real quick, just the phases. Yes, S tier for phase 3. I think phase 1 would be A or B, and then phase 2 is like a C or D. Yeah, there just wasn't much to that second phase. I liked it as a shaman. I was, decursing on the right side of the platforms. I was kicking the ad so you guys didn't have to, type of thing. Or at least that was always my goal. And that if a kick was missed, I could tremor. Like I felt like I had a lot of agency over how some of those platforms went. Um, but but I agree. Just phase 2 just kind of felt really really bad.
All right, Vigilant Guardian.
Yeah, vigilant.
Definitely similar to Sylve in that the mythic version was much better than the heroic version, where the heroic version felt like not even a boss almost.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Um, I think this is solidly. Oh, I'm debating between C or D.
I think
I think
C.
it's closer to C. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there were aspects of it that were good, like in the mythic version where you had something to hit the whole time. But I'll be honest, like you could just tell from our raid environments, we're normally like a little talkative or we're focused. That's a boss where nobody's focused, nobody's talkative, and
I
you
was
can
gonna say,
tell.
killing that boss, we are either all talking and nobody's paying any attention to anything, and we're completely goofing off, or we're all dead silent, just waiting for it to be over, and
Yeah.
there's no in between.
And the best part is when we're talking and things actually stop going well and people are dying and you just have that realization like, oh my gosh, I might have to pull this boss again, and then everybody freaking snaps out of it and then they try to kill the boss because they do not want to be there any longer.
Yep.
So I don't know. I liked, from a healing perspective, I liked in the mythic one that there was like those little orbs that you had to knock into that would make you take ticking damage based on the number that you hit. Felt like earlier in progression, before they nerfed it, it actually did some damage. Felt good to heal. Once they nerfed it, it was negligible. What about Dosegni, or however you want to pronounce it?
Yeah, it felt very meh. Kind of similar to like a Hungering Destroyer or a Remnant kind of thing for me. I think it was probably pretty solidly B.
I think B. I like that there were difficult points to heal, but I also very quickly realized there were people that made it difficult to heal too. You know?
Was I one of those people, Lutz?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I guess what I'm trying to say is that
Okay. You could have said yes. I was just asking the question.
that people that requires like relatively good positioning, whether that
Hmm.
means that you're venturing over the waves or
Yeah.
night fey blinking or whatever you can to mitigate that. And it was funny because like, you would get to 50% of this boss's HP and you either had a full group, people were doing what they were supposed to do, or you had people messing up, walking into rings extra times or not actually accounting for what was happening. They were so focused on the boss that they were dead. And when you suddenly have half your raid group and the boss has 50% HP, you're just kind of like, well, do we keep going? So that's the aspect that I liked. I feel like it had the difficulty and complexity of a second boss or a fourth boss, depending on how good your group was. So I think its position
Okay.
in the
I
raid
agree
was
with that.
good.
Yeah.
Um, I think B is a perfect ranking for it. especially looking at the other bosses that are in the B rank.
Yeah, I think we should do Skull X next, however.
Okay, we can hop to Skolex and we'll do the other artificer too. But yeah, so Skolex, what are your thoughts?
Um, Very similar to Hungering actually, where it was a little bit difficult initially on Prague because we got there I think week 2 of Mythic, or maybe even the first week of Mythic. I can't remember. No, because the first week of Mythic, Vigilant Guardian was pretty tough, and I think we just stayed in Heroic. But, and then we got double Legos, and our whole raid gained like 10% DPS, and we walked in the raid the next week and like killed him in 2 pulls. So that was kind of weird.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
it was. It looked like it would be really fun, actually similar to uh Guardian from Sanctum, where you would have to like carefully have like 9 people get stacks on the first one, and then 6 people, and then like 4, and then 2, or something like, and jump him a certain number of times to hit the enrage as long as possible to like optimize how much damage you're taking and things like that. I did some math before he came out from the PTR testing, and it looked like it would be that. And then it turns out you can just like all stack up when he's doing one of the cones, and it would cancel it. And then there's kind of just like a hard enrage at 6 minutes doing it that way. And I felt like that took a lot of the fun out of it. And it was kind of just this weird, heavy movement fight that felt. This was a boss that definitely I felt was definitely way harder for melee than ranged, and
that's
but it was
true.
just very boring as ranged. I don't know. I think it's a solid like C for me.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd agree. I
there
think
wasn't really anything positive that like bumps it up to a B that I can see the benefits of. It just kind of felt like it was there and then it wasn't, and so it's just kind of like a C.
what would have been really cool is killing it without the double Lego. I think that would have actually been a good boss.
Yeah, I think if we had the time to optimize like another 20 or 30 pulls on it and optimize our damage and try and make that enrage timer, I think that would have been the fun experience and the funner way to kill it. But the way we experienced it was not that, unfortunately.
Yep. And then Prototype Pantheon.
But did you want to do Zamox next?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Since
I'm
that's how
sorry.
we
Yes, yes, yes.
that's how we
Zymox. We will hop over to Zymox. You
progress
are
them.
absolutely right. But just to be clear, this is Sepulchre Zymox. So,
Right.
um, I don't like.
I have
Go
I
ahead.
have a weird perspective on this because I'm doing 2 of the ad platforms and whatnot, and I think for me this boss is an A. I think if you were one of the people that never did the ad platforms, this boss is like a C. So it's probably like a B, maybe, would be
Yeah.
my rough guess.
I wasn't one that did the ad platforms, and I personally just viewed it as a fight B. I really liked some of the complexity of the rings, like you learn that pattern, kind of the way that you learn it for the other Zymox. But I definitely think the other Zymox was cooler because the traps could be cleared, so you
Yep.
were like in this like cubby for most of the fight type of thing. I think B is a good place to put it personally. I agree though that from the farm that I've done and the platforms that I've seen, yes, platforms are more fun for sure. But
You have
I
to
don't know.
plan your movement and your cooldowns and stuff a bit more going on the platforms. If you're just kind of hitting the boss the whole time and the only ads are when he's in the intermission, I feel like it's much less interesting and it's kind of more on rails as to what you're doing when and stuff.
Yeah. While we're still on that side of the raid, before I made the mistake of talking about prototype, why don't we handle Halandris?
Well, sure, because it's, I think, relatively easy. I think Calandris with the 10-second bombs is the best boss of the expansion and up there in the best bosses of all time. So I think that's an easy S for me. I don't want to consider the 30-second bomb version. I feel like that's just, it's like not real in my mind. I still think of that boss in the 10-second version because we experienced like, I don't know, a solid 150 pulls of that version or something. So yeah.
I
If you
hear
never got
you.
to experience it though, I wonder if it's still similarly as highly regarded by those people.
I I think what I'll do is I will compromise with you and put it in A because
That pains me real bad.
the farm aspect of it is a big portion of it, right? And our farm only ever was with 30-second bombs. Um, my point being, we're not judging um a lot of these bosses based on their first iteration. We're judging them based on largely on their last. And that's gonna be the problem as we come up to a lot of the next bosses as well, right?
Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna judge some of these later ones, but find out when we get there, I guess.
But my point being, I would agree with you putting Halandris in S, but I think that it doesn't have to be here in A, it could be up here or whatever.
I was
But
gonna say I think it's a lot higher. Yeah.
yeah, I think that that makes more sense just because the nerfed Halandris and the fact that you skip all the reclaims and all that, that to me puts it lower. I wouldn't go any lower than A ever,
Mm.
but that feels more appropriate relative
I
to the
think
bosses that
I
are up
think
there.
if you hadn't progressed into P3 with the 10-second bombs, it's probably an A. But if you experienced the whole fight basically with the 10-second bombs like that, I think it's I think it belongs in S personally. But
Interesting. Well, we never
we
really
can
got
split the
to
difference.
P3. Did we?
We got in the first brief moments of P3. We got in the doorway kind of and barely settled in, and then we exploded.
Yeah, it's true. Well, we'll leave that one at controversial then.
Sure.
Maybe is there a way to make another tier?
Halandras tier.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about doing that. Add a row above. Crucial.
Oh, it doesn't fit. Unfortunate.
Yep.
And you
And
moved S below the other one. Can't.
oh wait, I did. How?
The arrow's on the right side.
What the? Alright, we're gonna do that.
Perfect.
Um,
Saved.
we can go back to Pantheon now. I'm gonna come right out there and say I just feel like it was a B.
It's definitely not an S. I think it's an A, personally. I enjoyed this
Interesting.
boss a lot. Um, I was also pretty lucky in that our raid comp didn't require me to be chasing around the ads on the far side of the room in P1 and the I forget what they were called, worshippers or something, necrotic dudes. Anyway, so I could mostly cleave off the boss and just kill kind of the melee ad and maybe one of the side ads if it needed help. Um, P2 was definitely the least fun part, but then P3 was really fun, but it was
Yeah.
also kind of short. I could see being the top of B. I don't know. It's borderline A for me. Some people apparently really hate this boss. I don't really understand why. Um, but I guess if we're splitting the difference and trying to be more widely representative of people's feelings like we are with Halandris, it's probably in B.
Okay. I'm going to slightly override your A response and put it at the top of B for this reason alone. Like you just said, you didn't have to go out there and kill the far
The
ads
I was gonna
clearly.
say the least fun part was having to move your line thing onto one of the ads, especially the far ad at the back of the room. That was the by far the least fun part of the fight, for sure.
Yeah, they definitely could have put the ads in placements around where the bosses spawn. That would have made a bit more sense in terms of, but I also
Something like
understand like
that.
the room. But for
Yeah.
me, the reason it's where it is because of how big that room really is. If I'm trying
Mm-hmm.
to heal the seed in the back because I need to pop that to save the raid, I can't help the raid at all. And
Yep.
that's the difficulty that I have with this fight, similar to the point that I will have about Lahubim in a second. Boss room is just too big.
I didn't feel that this room was that egregiously big, but I spent the start of P2 every single pull hunters marking the boss because it would remove your hunter's mark, and I needed that for damage reduction on the sire version of the ad, and then misdirecting one of the tanks and pumping damage into the sire ad so that he would go to the tank on the other side of the room. So I do experience that uh the room being big was a factor, but it definitely was not in the same universe as Lahuvim for me in
Uh,
terms of that issue.
yeah. Well, speaking of Lahubim, we can turn to it then. Where does that fight stand for you, though?
Well, so I was on trap the ad every 30-second duty for basically the whole time,
Hmm.
and that was really not fun. Um, I give this like a solid C. It's borderline D for me, I think though. I
Interesting.
I only really had fun when you were hitting the boss, like hitting the ads kind of felt pointless, even though sometimes they were a DPS check. But if you were doing them properly, they sometimes weren't. And doing the first one when you were doing two at once was kind of fun because then it kind of mattered, and you were actually had to do the Wee Woo Squad soul shaping across the whole room for 30 seconds, walking your whole way over there, uh, stuff like that. I don't know, man. Yeah, the boss room was way too big. The CCing the ads was too annoying. Um, the moats were a fun mechanic, and clearing the moats were a fun mechanic, but other than that, kind of annoying.
So this was a fight that I was not supposed to be in because one of the healers that I had assigned to be in for this fight and actually also prototype Pantheon wasn't available. I had to heal it. And actually two of our healers were out at the time, which works really well for a 3 heal boss. But I just remember that I actually really enjoyed healing this boss, but I also need to take into a couple things into account. I need to A, understand that you took the difficult trap duty, but also B, I talked about judging the bosses on their iterations, right? And the last
Oh,
iteration where
I forgot
you could
that
just
change.
all stack up,
Yes.
that puts it at low C for me, in my opinion. I think that cheesing that mechanic, killing that one entirely, it just yeah, I can't believe that happened. I remember the first time that I saw it, I was like, yeah, okay, this boss is a joke now. Like
Yeah.
they neutered Hollandris and Lahuvim in front of our eyes. Well, I think
Yeah.
Lahuvim was right after we killed it or something like that. But the next
Were we
time we
doing
walked
four
up,
groups before or five groups
5
before?
groups. We were doing 2
Okay.
melee, 2 range, and 1 tank group.
Yep.
I want to say, yeah,
Yeah, and so that was part of the difficulty was the like trapping the ad every 30 seconds. It's like, yeah, you're out of range of the boss for like 10 seconds, walking over there, placing the trap where he's already at, and then coming back. But the hard part was fitting that between when you're dropping moats and needing to clear moats and when you're needing to be stacked up for the push and pulls in and stuff like that. It was having to fit that 10-second window of time around those other mechanics. That was the hard part. And so basically had to learn where those windows were that you could actually spend the 10-second time running out that far and coming back, where you would still make it back in time that you could stack up with the raid and not die from uh, missing your stack group and stuff like that. So
yeah, such an
I
odd fight.
I do think I had more fun when it was in the smaller groups because it felt like it was more, I guess, personal into like how you were playing and whether your group survived and things like that.
Yeah,
Whereas once it was the whole raid, it felt kind of like if you messed up, it was just you who died, not like four other people. Um, so yeah, that kind of takes some fun out of it, I think. So
you were in my group by the way, the back right group. I don't know if you remember, but I think it was Moon. I want to say, but I
or
just remember
triangle, one
watching
of them.
you always
Yeah.
run over.
Yep.
So
I always like barely made it with like 1 or 2 seconds to spare.
yeah, you and Carrot, I remember were the ones that were
Well,
running at
because
the right time.
he was also rooting the other ad that
Hmm.
spawned on the other side of the room. So
Yep. Now we move on to Anduin, which felt like a last boss in
it
terms of
did.
its difficulty. You know, if you compare it to this next raid we're going into, this would be the last boss, the 8th boss. Oh boy. What did you think about it?
I think it's probably an A. I actually think the boss became a little bit less fun and more fun based on the changes they made to it after. So the blasphemy change was the main one, and then also the um, downstairs and upstairs killing ads faces became a little bit easier. I think they added a bit more leeway on the mechanics of those and stuff. I I think he's up in A for me. I'm not sure where exactly though.
I would agree with that.
I think he's pretty close to Silv. I don't know if he's above Silv or below Silv.
That's actually a good question. I don't know myself, but what I will say is I just really liked the intricacy of, you know, you're stunning those ads. You are ensuring that you don't hit them with the like little light ball that's shooting out of him or dark ball type of
Divine
thing.
Star. Yep.
Divine Star. Okay, there. Thank you. Divine Star. I like that there were 2 unique pieces that dropped off of him for the DK ring and the priest ring. Those felt pretty cool, or at least more of the priest ring than anything, just because all specs of it priest used it. Um, I don't know. I felt fun to kill. It was frustrating to get to the last phase and then have that not result in a kill. I progressed this fight in 2 different guilds, and it was interesting to see like the differences in the 2 different groups. Um,
I don't think we had too many P3 pulls before we killed it. I
that's
can't
true. We
remember
we
that
didn't
many.
have too many, but
I think we
we
had like
definitely had
3
some,
probably.
3 or
Yeah.
4, yeah. But what I will say is healing the downstairs ads, like being prepared for that, felt cool. Just because you had to know what you had to have in your toolkit available at the time, make sure it
Mhm.
goes well, or your co-healer will have to help out. Like that was a cool interaction.
Yeah, it was a very timing based boss for me, especially where I had both IQD and the first sigil trinkets and stuff like that, and having to line those up in certain combinations for either the upstairs phase, the downstairs phases, or the intermissions and stuff like that to make the most out of all those different cooldowns. Uh, I found a really fun puzzle to be solving and things like that. So
Yeah. Um, I think moving on, we should rate Lords of Dread first.
sure.
What did you think about this fight? And we have to talk
The
about both iterations.
I was gonna say the original version where it was only certain AoE spells got double damage was awful. That would have been down in probably C for me.
And
Once it
transferring circles.
Oh,
Stunning.
and the transferring circle is disorienting you. Yes. Um yeah, both of those real bad combination. Once the damage thing got changed, I think it was probably I would say high B, and then once the disorient got removed, I think it's up into A for me, but
Okay.
probably low A. Um it's still pretty annoying to re-kill sometimes, and it's but I enjoy that it's a fun 2 target fight at the same time, and I enjoy that it has uh damage amp phases like Sludge Fist a little bit that you can optimize around and have certain timings for and stuff like that. Um and it was unique enough having it be 2 targets that you're optimizing DPS around that it changes your decision making on stuff. So it was unique enough and it had some positives, but the intermission Among Us phases, it was like a fun gimmick, but it feels like more something that should be on like a Terraguru first boss than like a final near end boss almost. Um, and there was probably a bit too many of them, and they could last a little bit too long. Um, it was more fun, way more fun when the WeakAura just solved it for you. And I get that that's not the point, and that's not something that they liked really, but having to like manually click on people and vote and like hope people voted correctly or quickly enough for you to be able to do the phase is just it felt way more annoying and finicky to do. Kind of
Yeah.
similar to Kel'Thuzad, like intermission phases being finicky and stuff like that. So I think that takes it down a little bit. I think it still ends up in an A in the final version for me, but starting off, it was definitely probably down in C or even borderline D almost.
Yeah. So one, I think the intermission phases, if they had given you a set amount of time to handle, because like right now, or well, yeah, so even now, the faster you finish the phase, the better,
Mm-hmm.
arguably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that feels kind of counterintuitive to it. Like I wanted it to, if it was going to be a mechanic, I wanted it to actually be a mechanic, but it wasn't. It was one that you were trying so fast to skip as best as you could. And the only other point that I'll make is it's kind of funny. Like I hear people talk about Nyalotha and that one boss that like, gosh, it was down the little spiral, that hole where,
I
oh,
think it might be a phase.
Dressagath.
Okay.
My point being, I think there's a lot of people that to this day do that fight, don't know they're doing something wrong, and the boss still dies. But because they did something wrong, it made the boss fight a little bit harder. Whether it's baits or it's how they're supposed to handle their circles appropriately, like all those little things. Between the 2 groups that I've killed the boss with, it just feels like there are more and more people that don't still at this point don't fully understand the best way to approach that fight mechanically, or they're just not trying, either or. So that's and it just feels like it can have the potential to have so much of an effect on how your kill goes. But
The one other thing I would add is I think if you're the purple circle person, uh, and you're dispelling, especially when you have sometimes 4, 5, 6 people with green circles around you, there should be a bit more leeway time on when the green circles are dispelled and the pools come out. There should be more leeway time on you being able to like hit one of them for a fraction of a second and not get the green circle debuff applied to you brand new, fresh. There should be more leeway time for you to like, I don't know, either blink over it or book it out of there or be able to like disengage, jump over them or something. I don't know. But just like some little like 1 second more of leeway time, I think would make that way more enjoyable to progress. Because sometimes you literally just like get boxed in from every possible side and angle, and there's like a sleeping puddle in one direction or half of the directions, and the pool is in the other direction, and people are running at you, and it's a mess. And so, also some of them line up with the pull in for the Among Us phase, and so you don't want to like get pulled over a sleeping puddle also, which restricts your movement. Um, so yeah, I just think a little bit more leeway on that would be perfect, and that's the one last change I would make to that boss.
yeah, claustrophobic is just the way to describe that
Mm-hmm.
entire fight. And with that said, I think it was really well tuned for its difficulty in terms of the space that you had in the room, where you could like work on giving yourself more space versus if you wanted to just be risky with it, you could just keep running and you actually would still arguably have enough room, but it would be very packed at the end of the fight, that
Yeah,
type of
I think
thing.
once the damage change came through, I think the tuning was really good. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I think low A personally works really well for that. If we're taking into account all versions of fight, but also farm of it and all that. So yeah.
Now Raglan is interesting because I did not prog this boss.
Yeah, you didn't. And so I don't know if I even want to take your opinion, but I want to hear it now.
Wow, wow, damn. Um, I think it feels similarly to like a Guardian Sludgefist kind of thing, where it's like an end boss, like mostly patchwork kind of thing. The Quasars are a little bit of a wrinkle in that, but not too bad. And then the downstairs phase, kind of simple. It's just mostly about optimizing movement, making sure your tanks have like cooldowns, soaking them, and things like that. It's weird that the phase one positioning mattered so much into where the balls would drop for the phase two stuff or the intermission stuff. Um, I think overall I would give it an A at least, but I've heard a lot of people really liked it and would give it an S. I'm not sure it's up there as an S for me. I think if I progged it, it might be, but because I've only seen it on farm and I didn't really experience the actual pushing, optimizing it, trying to get it killed right before the enrage kind of thing, I think that drops it probably to A for me. But, um, oh, you think it's a Rygolon exception only tier?
I
Interesting.
kind of do. Yeah. So I didn't want to cut you off with typing that out, but I do think that if you progress this fight, that it is just amazing altogether. Even in farm, even though you're killing it before the end of the fight, this this fight in and of itself, between progressing it and the adjustment that they made to it on farm, put it in a little bit of a unique tier. Where, I agree with you. I think the first iteration of Laundress was really good. I think the last one wasn't so good. I think with Rygolon, um, they made the fight easier for sure, where you didn't have to have somebody go into each and every puddle that it dropped, which, in my opinion, made it a bit more of a joke of a fight. I think that alone killed it for me from being an S. So I think that it kind of nestles itself in well with Halandris in its own unique tier. What do you think about that?
Personally, I would still put both of them in S if I had to make the call. Even having
Yeah.
not progressed Ragolon, I think because I'm thinking in my head like if I had only experienced uh like Nathria Zymox, for example, only on the farm version versus the prog version, would that have been an S for me, or at the top of A still? And the answer is probably not. So like I'm kind of getting a sense of what the difference is between that in similar way to what Raglan would have been like in prog, I think. And I think I can tell that that would have been enough of a difference that I would have bumped it up to S for sure.
hmm Mhm.
And then Halandras, I'm already like wanting back in S, so I think I would bump them both up personally. But
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I mean, I could put them towards this end. I
towards the
think that's
bottom, yeah.
appropriate too. We delete that row, so we are back to the normal. But but I agree. I do think that they're definitely better than the A fights. I
I'm
don't.
almost wanting to bump Nathria Zymox up to S at this point.
Hmm. I would do that as long as they were at the end of S.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. But before we keep doing the iterations.
No, no, no. That's the one I wanted to do before we end.
Okay.
We're leaving him on a cliffhanger.
Oh, we're not
Tune
doing
in next
Jailer.
episode. No, okay.
Oh,
We're
okay.
doing Jailer.
Okay. Okay.
We're doing Jailer. Okay,
Oh,
this
Jailer.
is I've I don't know where to begin and where to even start because the start of Prague felt so different to like the middle near end of Prague, and then nerfs hit, and then it was Prague over the end, and then Farm has felt weird. I've enjoyed Farm pretty decently, I would say, but I think that's only because we spent so much time experiencing what the boss was like beforehand. And I think if we had progged it from the start after all those nerfs, if I would still feel the same way. It's not an S for sure. No way. Is it an A?
Hey,
I could see it maybe being a low A. I think it's closer to B for me.
I think B, and the reason I'll say is or just 3 words. Line of sight.
Yeah,
That's it.
knockbacks would be the other word I would use. And
Okay.
jumping
Okay.
into a hole. And yeah. I think, yeah, it just had one too many little annoying things. Like if it was just the bomb holes and not the line of sight, I think it would be fun. But
Yeah.
having both is not fun. Yeah, it's definitely I don't know where it is in B. I'm not going to debate that, but I think it's definitely lower than most of the A bosses for sure.
Yeah. I don't think we.
I mostly enjoyed phase 3 and phase well, I didn't even enjoy phase 4 that much because it was so short and you didn't really experience it that much. The brief like phase 3 with the lust and the six stack and the torment ads and blasting and dropping the files and taking the gates and all that, I found that really fun.
Yeah.
Killing the MCs was kind of boring. Optimizing phase 1 was kind of fun, but by the end of it you had done it so many times that you weren't optimizing it anymore. You were just like, I hope we make it to phase 2 and phase 3 on this poll, and then you didn't, and you were
Yes.
back in phase 1. And so it's like it was fun to optimize at the start and then very quickly became not fun anymore. So I don't know. Yeah, that's my feelings.
You know what? I think I pretty much echo your sentiments there. This fight was mostly in its phase one in terms of its progression. Like, and then did you know the dance for the rest of the fight? But we also experienced the incredibly
Oh,
nerfed version of this.
I was gonna say the other thing that was so frustrating was the mind control lines when it was getting hit by two
Oh yes. Oh
controlled you.
yes. Honestly,
That
forgot that was a
was super
thing.
frustrating. Was there anything else that changed that was even more extreme too?
I
I
mean,
feel like I'm
the
forgetting
bomb
something pretty
damage and the
major.
big knockback in phase two.
Yeah, the knockback was pretty big.
That killed phase two. That made phase two a bit of a joke in my mind. Outside of the tanks and their unique
Yeah,
moving around.
it did. The knockback was just more of like it was more like a Halandras bomb mechanic type thing, where it was like if you just weren't paying attention for a certain 5 second window, you would just get knocked in a hole randomly and die because you didn't. Or like some, it was also because of the line of sight and because of the giant like pillar of light in the middle of the room and stuff like that, and the room being so big and like some of it was just you don't really have the camera position to be able to see where the knockback is exactly going to knock you from, and I felt like there wasn't really a great way of being able to like line yourself up against it as easily as you would want to, especially because it was so randomly in where it was going to be placed pull to pull, rather than being a consistent thing. So yeah, once they got rid of the knockback, it made it significantly easier, but it was also just it wasn't like it was hard before, it was just annoying, I think.
Yeah, it's
The Beyblades
weird
were a
that
fun mechanic. I liked those, and the line soaks to the center.
yeah, yeah, those all felt good. I liked the way that you could optimize where you could like get to a higher stacks, like extend your stacks but use healer
Mm-hmm.
cooldowns. Granted, it was kind of like calculated at a certain point in terms of how to progress it. I really think the nerfs killed the fight though, but I was also at the point in the tier where I was like, kind of, thank goodness they came through and this boss died, because I'm kind of over with progressing it. This was a long tier. You know, like if we were actually raiding the raids alongside these, Sepulchre would probably be a bit low for me just because of that. So that makes me just so much more excited for Dragonflight.
Sepulchre has what? Two bosses in A, one in S? No, two in S. But a lot of they have like two, three in C. Um, yeah, I
That's a
feel
good
like
point.
Sepulchre was high highs and low lows at the same time, whereas most of the other raids were a bit more evenly mixed. I think.
Interesting. That's a good um, analysis of it, in my opinion. But I don't know. It'll be interesting when we return to the concept of a tier list with the bosses from Vault of the Incarnates that I've said appropriately now. Not Vault of the Wardens. If I say Vault of the Wardens, you guys get to make fun of me. But yeah. I don't know. That's kind of where I stand on it. Do you have any final, or actually, do you want to look at adjusting this at all, or do you feel like it's kind of
I'm
more?
I'm pretty happy with this overall. I don't think I would adjust anything.
I think the only thing I would do is I'd move Remnant above I, because I
Interesting.
really liked healing this fight because at the end it was very very intense. But that's kind of like the only change I would make. I think.
I do wonder if we should drop something or two things in C down to D possibly, but I don't know. The main two I'm thinking of in my head is probably Vigilant and SLG, but
Down
I'm
to
not
D,
sure.
you're saying?
Yeah, but I'm not sure if I feel that negatively about them. Or maybe I don't feel as negatively about Kel'Thuzad and Sun King as I thought. I don't know. C and D
Yeah,
are kind of
almost.
roughly equivalent to each other. Yeah.
Yeah, almost interchangeable. You could argue that like if you'd organize the listing of them, it would make more sense.
Yeah.
But I don't really feel like there needs to be a lot of adjustment here. And obviously these are all just opinions. It's you can kind of get a glimpse into how it is that we experience these fights. It was kind of cool to hear how you really enjoyed Hollanders, and I really hated sitting in that call watching you guys kill it. And you know I really liked healing Lahuvim, and you really hated
you
throwing
would
a
have had
trap out every 30 seconds.
you would have had way more fun if you had been playing Halandris. I can
Oh,
assure
I
you
don't
of
know,
that.
man. I don't. A lot of deaths to bombs that I could not control or even know about or
But
see all that
if
well.
you're in the raid, you're watching for them and you can save the pull when they go wrong and stuff. You would have had so much. I guarantee you.
Ooh, maybe, maybe. We will never know, though. I've only ever killed it in farm, and the farm kills have gone fairly well. So, but we can leave it at that. Who knows if we're raiding this week? We may have an episode right before the pre-patch. Otherwise, if we don't, we're definitely gonna be discussing that pre-patch, how it's going following the launch of it. So, see you next time.